Hi there, this is Aidan from Brainbug Design and welcome to our course/tutorial where we're going to take you through the process of adding 3D effects to a 2D illustration using camera projection techniques, which is new stuff. It's where you take an image or a texture and you kind of shoot it out to the camera onto the geometry in your scene. So it's kind of hybrid 2D, 3D workflow that can give you some really interesting and cool looking results. You'll see it sometimes, it's used a lot in like films and animation, and it's based a lot of matte painting. We're going to be doing it in a very kind of stylized and a simpler way, so it's kind of a bit more achievable, but it's still going to give you some really great results. So we're very much looking forward to showing you how that works and our process, and if all goes well, we'll be going through that with you relatively soon. So fingers crossed, we have all the things we need to kind of get in there and start making some cool artwork in Blender. Hello and welcome. This is Aidan from Brainbug. I'm one of the co-founders, and in this kind of course mini tutorial, we're going to go through the process of taking an image, a concept art piece, or an illustration, something like this, for example, and taking it through some of the processes we'll use to get it into Blender and apply 3D effects and really bring it to life. We have a course that covers some techniques for this sort of process with 2D planes. This one, we're going to use some new techniques like camera projection / camera mapping, which are going to really elevate this piece of artwork and take it to the next level. So what we have here is a piece done by one of the other team at Brainbug, Jamie, one of our co-founders. This is kind of near history, sci-fi, almost like pseudo steampunk, but maybe. And it's a great example of an image that will work well with this process. It's got lots of depth. You can see through the image we have clear foregrounds, middle grounds, backgrounds, and like further distance. And these elements are going to work really nicely as we build a scene that has these in a 3D scene, and we can really make use of the space and depth of this image. The composition is really nice, and overall it's just a really engaging and exciting image, and we'll do our best to do it justice in Blender. So with that being said, maybe we'll just jump across and show you what we're going to do with this image and the results we can expect to achieve. So we'll see you in Blender any second now. And as we play this animation, you can see some of what we'll be able to do with this by the time we're finished. As you can see in this, we've got all sorts of new things happening that aren't in the 2D image. We're able to crop in, we're able to like recompose the shot, we can move things around. We've got special effects, we've got depth of field, motion blur, all sorts of interesting things that are really helping to kind of take this thing into a whole new feeling and vibe, and we'll show you how to do that. So let's get started with that and see how we get on. And here we are. We're ready to kind of get the ball rolling and start taking things into Blender. And the first thing we need to do is take in our artwork. So we're going to use add image as plane to do that. We're gonna, and there it is, we found it. We are currently not in a texture mode, so let's look at material preview, give it a second to compile the shader. So there we have it. So that's fine for now. I'm going to get rid of this cube. I'm going to move this out of the way. We might need this for various reasons. I'm going to create a camera. I'm just going to lock the camera to the front here and add that camera with Shift A to bring up the add shortcut. So there's our camera. You can click on this icon here to set that to your active camera if it isn't already. There we go. So now we're in this camera. Rather than using this background, actually, for now, I'm going to add a reference image into the camera itself. There's a few advantages to that. So that's our image. We can adjust the transparency, etc. There's a few other settings in here. But so far, I believe that's everything we need. If I come out of the camera mode by pressing 0 on the keypad, you'll see that doesn't exist in the scene. It's just a projection inside the camera. A useful reason for having that is if I bring in, for example, like a sphere or something, let's put that into our scene, and I go back into our camera view, press 0 on the keypad. So there's our camera or object. If we want to be moving things around in the scene and lining things up, you'll see that I can't actually see the image because the object is shaded and blocking it. Whereas because we're using this image as a reference on the camera, whatever view mode I'm in, it will still show up. So if I go into like wireframe mode, I'm pressing a Z shortcut there to bring up that menu. You'll see now that that object is visible, and I can line things up with my geometry, which again, we'll show you as we go. That becomes more important. But without it being part of the camera projection, you wouldn't be able to do this as easily. So it's definitely a nice little workflow to consider if you haven't already. So we're going to be using this quite a lot. So now that we've got our kind of rough camera setup, we're going to try and maybe align things a little bit to the world a bit more. So we know, for example, if I go back in here, the camera's on an angle, it's got a certain amount of perspective on it. There are tools to match camera perspectives. There's, I think, called F-Spy for Blender, or sorry, it works alongside Blender if you want to use it. We're not going to do that complicated. It's not camera tracking in the real sense. So we're just going to maybe eyeball it. So there's going to be a bit of guesstimating. As long as it looks roughly okay, I think we should be fine. I'm going to bring in just a ground plane. Just add some geometry. I'm going to scale this up quite big. Again, it's no particular size it has to be, but we just want a sort of giant plane. And I'm going to like subdivide it as well so we get some perspective lines on it, essentially. These grids will help us kind of see it recede into the distance. So I then go into my camera view. So there's our plane. At the moment, my camera isn't moving, so I'm going to press T and N to bring up all my UI elements here. So I'm going to lock the camera to view here. So as I move the camera around, we can start to see it's moving in space, and now I can start to see that plane that we've just made. So you can see now we've got a bit of receding perspective going on. So I can tilt that down a bit. Maybe I need to rotate the camera. I'm going to split the view here. Not that way, not that way. Let's try again. Here we go. I'm going to leave this view here as the camera view. One other thing I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to change the visibility of this on the camera settings here. There's a viewport display option here. And this passe partout, I don't know if it's French. There you go. I'm just going to bring that up so I don't see outside the limits of the camera. I find that quite distracting. So in this view here, we're just going to look at normal perspective from outside the camera view. And I can see that we want a bit of tilt on the camera. So when I do that, let's just rotate it ever so slightly until it kind of roughly matches up. Feel like something like that. And also going into the camera view, feel like we're kind of looking at an angle. Let's make this slightly bigger again and just kind of make sure we've got a rough approximation of the perspective line. So we can see some of the perspective leading into the scene here. It's not 100%, but it's a starting point. So from here, we can start to maybe bring in some other bits of geometry and then kind of seeing how things start to line up for us. So right now, it's going to be some simple, just adding objects like cubes, like so. So we know it's going to be roughly building size. So that cube is, I think the default cube is 2 meters. So that's about the size of a person. I'm going to maybe just bring that up to like rest on the ground-ish. I'm going to just roughly scale that to kind of like the volume of a person, like, you know, just as a reference for myself. And with that in mind, we might have to, you know, reconsider some of the scaling of other bits in the scene. I like to kind of work at roughly kind of realistic scale because it can help with lighting and material sometimes, but it's not essential in this one. So with that, we're just going to keep adding a few more cubes. I feel like, you know, what's the height of a 4 or 5 story building? 2 meters per story, so maybe like 5 stories, 10 meters tall-ish. This is all very guesstimate and like back of the envelope maths. And what I might want to do is just subdivide that again, just so I've got like, let's make it 5, so it's like 5 stories. Again, this doesn't have to be exact or anything like that. Again, I'll just make this full screen so we can see what's going on. I've just subdivided this cube, and based on how it looks in here, we're just going to move things around. I'm going to scale this to the side a little bit over here. We just need to see a bit of this camera so we can kind of see what's going on in our scene. So I'm going to move our cube here. I'm going to kind of use this building here as a bit of a reference. That kind of goes to the edge here. Checking in Photoshop as well. So yeah, just checking in Photoshop what we're actually looking at and kind of getting a better feel for what we're going to be blocking out, it seems to me that the edge of this building here is kind of along that section there. If I can just highlight it again, maybe, you know, the edge we're seeing up in the corner here is kind of like, that's where it's been destroyed. It used to be here, but now it's not. So this is the kind of the volume we're going to be representing. So this is the cube that we're building right now. So let's jump back into Blender. So that gives us a better idea of what we're dealing with there. And let's just move it back and around the scene a little bit so that, yeah, we're getting kind of a rough idea of that scale. It feels like this is our person, and this is a building that's across the way from them. Kind of in this ballpark. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. We can kind of guesstimate a little. I feel like maybe going back to the camera, I might want to change perspective a little bit. It feels like this is close, but it's not quite as extreme maybe. So just maybe dial that back down to 40. So we're getting a little bit more perspective. Obviously that's going to change the layout of some of this stuff. So I'm going to just rejig the camera a little bit just to move things around. Again, this will all be up to your own eyeball judgment, whether this is successful or not. But I can see that the perspective on that building is not a million miles off now. And again, it's more than enough for what we're probably trying to do. It feels like it's actually, you know, sitting down onto the ground a bit more. So let's raise our viewpoint a little bit here. And once we're more or less happy, we're just going to carry on with this process. With that building done, I'm going to go back into this view here. I'll make this solid so we can kind of see what's going on. I'm just going to duplicate that and push it back. This one's a bit further back in the distance. It's not right beside it because I can see there's, again, if I look back in Photoshop, that feels like it's, you know, quite far away relative to here. It's not literally right behind it, you know. That's some distance. So I'm going to push that back here, and let's just go into here and just kind of double check what we've got. I'm going to drop it into the ground. Why not? We can cheat things and see how that's looking. I can see that we can see this edge here, which we don't want. Let's get rid of our scale person for a second. I'm going to make this building scale back a bit this way. Yeah, there we go. And then going back into wireframe mode, let's just reposition that slightly. So there we go. That's looking okay. For the other buildings, we're going to do a similar process. I'm going to drag this back here. You can see here, this is where our kind of first maybe perspective issues are going to come in. Let's make this plane a little bigger so it's kind of stretching back to the horizon. It's not quite there yet. And yeah, we want that to be resting on it quite nicely. So again, looking at this building here, I think that's kind of, let's look in our Photoshop file. It feels like these two aren't too far away from each other, actually. You know, like that's the corner, that's going back there. And maybe this is kind of just sat a little bit further in front of it in space. Not 100%, but we don't have to be 100%. We're just kind of guesstimating as we go. And let's just bring that over, maybe back a little. And then we're going to scale things up a little bit. We'll go that way. We've got a guy in the way here, so is that giving us any clues? I feel like we don't have enough tilt on the camera maybe, so let's grab the camera while we're here and really kind of go in and finesse that tilt angle. So you can see here actually my camera. I'm going to change the rotation to local so it's kind of lined up with the camera. You can see there, if it's in world, it's not quite, whereas local, it's going to be rotating around the kind of the camera itself. There we go. I feel that's a little better. There's a building back here as well, but it's very faint. If we go back into Photoshop, you can see it a bit better. I don't know if we're going to need to make that a 3D object at this stage, so let's not worry about it too much. We're just going to focus on the main buildings. And then kind of coming forward, we're going to look at some of the other buildings here. So we're almost done with this stage. And then looking at the scene that we've built, I'm just going to grab that main building again. So the only one we're missing here is kind of like this. I'm going to pull that in here. And This is the only one where you can see the perspective is very, disjointed from the geometry. But that, I'm just rotating that roughly. Feels like it might need to be scaled back a little bit. So let's just use this to scale it back that way. We're going to move that back as well. It's obviously intruding a little bit. So this is our foreground, I guess. Something like that. Let's double check what we're seeing here. I just want to make sure, I don't want to move my camera at the moment, so I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see better what's happening. I'm going to rotate this ever so slightly, just kind of see if it helps in any way. Or position. Just fine tuning as we go. And that's kind of more or less okay. We have some rubble and stuff here, but we're going to deal with that later. In the meantime, we just want a kind of a rough approximation of the main sort of stuff. So we're kind of getting there, and we'll see how we can go next. We're kind of maybe ready to start thinking about applying a texture and things like that. I'm going to unhide our scale guy. You can find him. There he is. Let's just call this scale. This will be useful maybe as we look at some of these figures here and trying to figure out where they are in space. So that's kind of a good starting point to look at the next bit of this, which we'll be ready to do any second now. And now we come to a bit more of an exciting part. We're going to start actually putting some textures in our scene and seeing what happens. Should be pretty straightforward. I'll go through the steps now and show you what we're going to be doing. So the first thing we're going to do is get a texture onto these objects. We're going to start with this one and then just carry on from there. So I'm going to find the shader editor here. We're going to make a new shader. So I'll just click new shader there. Nothing special about this at all. We have a name for it maybe. Just call it projection material. So that's our thing, and we're going to give it a texture. I'm going to press Control T. And then I'm just going to use the background image as our texture. Let's get this onto material preview actually. So you can see that material is now on our object. It's not looking particularly good, but we're going to sort that out by doing something else. So what we want to do, we want it to match the actual concept behind. So let's look at wireframe. So we want this texturing to match this kind of concept because we're going to essentially be shooting the texture out of the camera and at all the objects in the scene. Get our object here. I'm going to go back into material preview. Let's add a modifier here. I'm going to bring this out a little bit, and we're going to add the EEVEE project modifier. And that is going to be a modifier that once we set it up is going to, as I said, project the texture out from the point of view of the camera. Again, don't worry if that doesn't make sense just yet. We're going to make sure that it does. And I think we select the camera here. Just double check. Yes, that is correct. It's still not going to look right. We're going to worry about that in a second. So now that we have the texture on here and this modifier, which is the correct ones, we want that on all the other objects in the scene. And a quick way of doing that is select everything else and then finally select the object with the things that we want, which is this. I'm shift selecting now. And then I'm going to press Control L to link objects. So first I'm going to just link materials. Boom, you can see that is now the right material. I'm going to do the same thing again, Control L. I'm going to link modifiers. Copy modifiers? Yes, that's what I want. Before I do, I'm going to do one thing. And a crucial part of this is the modifier aspect ratio. That has to be the same as our image dimensions of our projected image. So I think that's 16:9. So let's go back to our modifier. Standard widescreen ratio, I think. Our image might be slightly different to that, I think, but it's more or less ballpark enough for us to start with. If I need to change that later, I will. We select all the other objects. We select that object last. I'm going to do Control L, copy modifiers, and there we go. Now, this looks terrible right now because there's a couple of things we still need to do. It's kind of all right, though. You can see that it's more or less matching. If I just kind of go to like wireframe mode. So if I go toggle between the two modes, wireframe and our just material preview, things are matching up pretty closely. There's a few things we can do to help it even more. So let's come out here. One thing that is really unusual and unexpected maybe is the fact that how subdivided your geometry is affects how well the camera projects this texture across it. If I subdivide this once more, you might see, yeah, it kind of starts to look more correct, if that makes sense. I'll undo that a second time. Look at the wobbles in here, slightly wobbly, and let's subdivide and subdivide again, and you'll notice it's kind of becoming more accurate. So particularly on the ground, that's looking really good now, even though it looks crazy. That is looking good. It's not too many polygons. It's not going to kill your machine. That's only a few thousand, but that is now the effect we want. For example, now let's just undo it again a couple of steps, and you'll see the difference. You can see the irregularities that are in that texture as it's being shot out from the point of view of the camera, which is down here. It's kind of like an explosion of pixels from that point down here. Do the subdivision and make it as accurate as possible without killing our machine. I think that should be enough, that level. And we're also going to do it on these buildings as well. They're already subdivided a bit, but I'm going to do that a couple more times just to be on the safe side. Okay, so let's have a quick look at our camera view. That is looking good. You'll notice there's some slight differences in shading, like you can see the edges of things here. And that's because we need to tweak our material ever so slightly. So again, I drag in a window from this side. Yes, I can. Always still trying to get used to Blender's UI. So let's look at our shader editor here. Get rid of that side panel. Well, what we want to do is we want to kind of cheat our material a little bit. So we're just going to change a few settings. We're going to take the specular down to 0 because we don't want that actually kind of having any glossiness or reacting to light in any way. So our specular is 0, and we're going to bring our roughness up to full, like 1. Again, just so it's incredibly matte and hopefully unreactive to light. And to further that effect, we're going to plug the color into the emission slot, which again, we've got a shader component. So you can kind of see here now, we're kind of starting to lose the sense of it being shaded from different directions. The reason this looks now like it's slightly different because that's our viewport from the camera. That's our viewport background, which is here, and that's faded out slightly. So if I increase the transparency, let's make this rendered. There we go. Now everything's starting to match up. So I'll just decrease the transparency. You can see like that's the scene. We're starting to see how it's all kind of coming together. Again, if I turn back the camera, we're in the camera view, and then turn our background reference image, and you can see it's all fairly seamless now. And this is where we want to bring in the background plane we had earlier. So this is our background image. I'm going to put that right at the back. I'm just going to scale it up. Keep scaling it. Keep scaling it until we start. Oh, there we go. So we can start seeing. It's probably too big already. But we're going to try and match that up roughly to what we can see on the reference image here. That's pretty close. If we look at the kind of the major landmarks like the corner here and the tip here, on average, we can kind of get a good superimposition there. So that's looking pretty good to me. I'm going to double check that's the right material. I'm going to assign the material we're using for these onto it. So let's our solid objects. I'm going to click that, then click the material that we want off this object. I'm going to Control L and link materials. And there you go. You can see instantly that's matched up much nicer. We're in a pretty good position now. So again, just go into here and we can kind of see how our scene is looking. So it looks kind of crazy from this point of view, but don't worry, it will start looking a little bit better and making more sense, I guess. Get this into camera view and admire our handiwork, because that's kind of a pretty big chunk of what we're doing here, and it's done. And next we'll show you how to set up a camera in here and start moving things around a little bit. The next thing we're going to do now at this kind of stage is introduce a camera that can move around and kind of show us this kind of 3D effect a bit better. So we do already have this camera, but we're going to use this camera we've created here exclusive as just projection. I'm just going to call this projection camera. There we go. So that's our projection camera. We don't want this to ever move. If I unlock it again, because I've done that to stop myself doing this, but I'm going to do this deliberately. If I move it around, watch what happens in the camera view here. This is the camera view off to the side, which I will make ever so slightly bigger. So we can kind of see. If I move this, because the textures are kind of essentially being shot out the front of this camera like a shotgun, it's going to change the textures in the scene if I move it. So I never want to move it. It's in the right place though for our point of view, and we actually do want to use that. So what we're going to do in this case, I'm going to duplicate it. That has now duplicated, and I'm going to call that just render camera maybe. So going back to our original projection camera, I'm going to just make sure that is locked, and we can't do anything with that. This one, on the other hand, we can do stuff with. This is not, it's a copy of the other camera, but this is now independent to do its own thing. The other camera is the one that is controlling the textures. And to kind of explain how that works, if I do move this now, actually, I need to make sure we select this as our active camera. You can see I'm just clicking on this icon here. That will do that. So this is our new camera. And already, if I start moving it, you can see now the 3D effect has been applied to the scene. So we're seeing the scene from the point of view of this new camera, and we can move around the scene now. You can see how it breaks quite easily. If I go shooting into the scene, you can see our textures are starting to go absolutely crazy. And if I come out too far, you can see how that breaks. But within a certain reason, we can do quite a lot. And we're also going to show you how to kind of get more out of this process with the next steps. But for now, this is going to be really useful. And again, just to show as well, if I kind of change the focal length on this, maybe more of a telephoto kind of zoom lens, I'll give it 75. You can see there, so we can start moving our camera, and like even if I go over here, right, I can start moving around. And it gets a little crazy, but we have a lot of options available to us soon. And this is it. This is the exciting bit. We've done the kind of groundwork to kind of get our whole scene ready for the next steps, and that's just what we're going to do. We're going to start looking at maybe making more sophisticated textures for these buildings, getting rid of some of the stuff so that these bits don't look so weird, pulling out some of the characters onto their own special textures separate from everything else, and we can start animating them and putting them into the scene. And it's just going to start looking better, everything we do from this point on. So looks a bit odd now, but it's just the beginning. So let's look at what's next and get cracking.